Princess Louisa Inlet, which must be one of the most beautiful places on Earth, is 6 kilometers long and just a few hundred meters wide for most of its length. It is a remote place and is a mere gap off the long body of water called Jervis Inlet, which goes deeply into the British Columbia mainland off Georgia Strait, the inland sea between the Canadian mainland and Vancouver Island. It can only be reached by boat or floatplane. In June 1792, Captain George Vancouver, a British naval officer charged with charting this part of the western coast of Canada, explored Jervis Inlet right up to its end. He was hoping that it would lead to the Northwest Passage back to the Atlantic, but he was disappointed here as he had been so many times before during that season of exploration. There were many, many dead ends along this coast. Whilst exploring Jervis Inlet, however, he did spot the entrance to Princess Louisa Inlet, but didn't go in through the narrow entrance at Malibu Rapids, as the tide was ebbing so fast out of there and he couldn't spare the time. 68 years later, in 1860, Captain George Richards, Royal Navy, explored Jervis Inlet, and he too missed Princess Louisa. But in the same year, Commander Richard Mayne ventured into Malibu Rapids at slack tide, when the water was neither flowing in nor out of the inlet. When the tide is flowing, the water can go as fast as 10 miles per hour and can be very turbulent. Commander Mayne discovered a long, narrow, exquisitely beautiful fjord with the impressive Chatterbox Falls at its head. He in turn was disappointed that the inlet went no further and didn't lead to anywhere. After 1860, for several decades, the inlet was explored no further and was known only to the Indigenous people of the region, the Seashelt Nation, who called the inlet Suivalot, meaning sunny and warm. During the summer months, the waters and forests surrounding Jervis Inlet and Princess Louisa provided abundant resources of fish and game for the Seashelt people. But the native people had a certain amount of reserve, if not fear, about entering Princess Louisa, as there were certain taboos and old legends that they were somewhat nervous about. One story had it that at Chieftain's Rock, a pinnacle of rock rising straight from the water for 50 feet or so, with a small shelf of rock at the top, young native men with a heavy rock strapped to their backs had to climb to the top to prove their manhood. Some of them didn't make it, hence the legends of ghosts inhabiting the place. In 1919, a young man named James McDonald, aged 30 at that time, known as Mac to his friends, a man given to boating and hiking adventures along this coast, discovered for himself and fell in love with Princess Louisa Inlet. In the following years, he became a mineral prospector and he made a substantial amount of money in Nevada. But he had never forgotten Princess Louisa Inlet. Subsequently, in 1927, he had sufficient money to buy 45 acres of land at the head of Princess Louisa in the area around Chatterbox Falls. He built himself a rustic log house there, which became his beloved hideaway for many decades. In the years to come, James F. McDonald had a profound effect on the future and fortunes of the inlet. From 1927, after his purchase of the property, until his last visit in 1972, MacDonald welcomed generations of boaters to his docks with a warmth and generosity which never wavered. He told them all stories of the region and pointed out interesting oddities that fascinated his visitors. He never charged people fees for the use of his facilities, and he became a legend in his own lifetime. He was universally loved by all who met him, and all who met him fell in love with the Princess Louisa Inlet, the Princess, as he called it. Others, of course, in those early years had spotted how beautiful the place was. Bill Boeing, the founder of the Boeing Aircraft Company, had discovered the inlet during a vacation in British Columbia, and he, in turn, introduced it to Thomas Hamilton, another aviation pioneer. Hamilton was overwhelmed by the rugged splendor of Princess Louisa, and within 3 years, in the 1930s, had purchased large amounts of land around the inlet. He then began his plans for the design and construction of a series of luxury resorts, beginning with the Malibu Club at the narrow entrance to the inlet. Because of its remote location, the scheme took a fairly long time to get off the ground. The Malibu Club was to be the first of several deluxe properties to be built at Princess Louisa, and they were designed to attract the rich and famous to the area. They were expected to come in their yachts and seaplanes, and over the years, several did, including John Wayne, Bing Crosby, Bob Hope, and a very young future president, John F. Kennedy. But great success never shone on the Malibu Club Resort venture. The Second World War started soon after its inception. The sand and soil barged in to construct an 18-hole golf course were never used. Quite where this golf course was to be located was never made clear. In the end, the resort didn't manage to open until 1945. The resort never spread beyond the original Malibu Club, and the whole concept never really prospered. There was a case of polio at the resort, and profits, never exuberant, slowly dwindled away. On a rainy evening in 1950, Hamilton packed his family into a float plane and abandoned the property forever. He never returned. The place languished for a while. The Chatterbox Falls. About a mile above here, towering over the head of the inlet, are the James Bruce Falls, the highest measured waterfall on the North American continent. At 2,755 feet, it's also the 9th highest in the world, so it's in some spectacular company. It stems from a year-round snowfield and glacier and cascades down the mountainside to empty into Lockwilts Creek, which in turn empties into Princess Louisa Inlet via the Chatterbox Falls. After Hamilton had abandoned Princess Louisa, not everybody had forgotten Malibu. A couple called Campbell, who had, like many others, found it on vacation, introduced the place to Jim Rayburn, the founder of a worldwide organization called Young Life. Young Life was, and still is, an organization dedicated to the enriching and fulfilling of young lives around the world. Jim Rayburn saw Malibu's potential at once, and in 1953 he beat Thomas Hamilton's price down from $1 million to $300,000, and since then the Malibu Club has been run as a non-denominational summer camp for teenagers from all over the United States and Canada. So, for almost 6 decades, Princess Louisa Inlet has been the setting for inspirational holidays for many thousands of young people, some of them now fairly elderly. Here, near Chatterbox Falls, in 1940 Mac's house burned down, after which he lived on a houseboat. But he continued his occupation of his land around the falls, at the head of this gem that is Princess Louisa Inlet. He recognized the unique beauty and majesty of the princess, and, in time, he came to believe that it should be enjoyed by all, and not to belong to just one individual. Mac was pleased that Young Life had acquired the Malibu Club, and every year he would often paddle down the inlet to regale the kids with all the tales he had to tell about his beloved princess. They were always fascinated by this now fairly elderly man. Whole boatloads of the young people would go up to the head of the inlet to Chatterbox Falls, to explore the glades of the rainforests near Mac's docks, to climb up to the lookout point, high, high above the inlet, to frolic and gamble in the falls, to have cookouts at the campfires that Mac had built. Mac was tireless in his entertaining the Young Life kids from the Malibu Club, and whole generations of them remembered him fondly as they went their various ways in the rest of their lives. From the beginning, Mac was always deeply troubled by the potential for unscrupulous commercial exploitation of the princess. It's not to say that he was pleased by the commercial failure of the Malibu Club, but he was certainly more pleased by the way that the club had become a place for the healthy development of young people. He always wanted the Princess to be preserved without the ravages of commercialism. He wanted it to be pristine and undeveloped for the enjoyment of all people. He rejected several offers to purchase his land, but in time he could no longer afford to keep up and subsidize his property at Chatterbox Falls. He continued to spend the summers on his houseboat until his last visit in 1972. But in 1953, at about the same time that the Young Life organization had acquired the Malibu Club, he had deeded his land to the society which had been set up for the purpose, namely the Princess Louisa International Society. At that time, Mac wrote, "In giving my Princess Louisa property to the boating public of the Pacific Northwest, I feel that I am completing a trust. The head of the Princess Louisa Inlet is one of the most lovely, outstanding, spectacular beauty spots in the world. It is the Yosemite Valley, the fjords of Norway, and many other places all wrought into the background of our conifer forests of the Pacific Northwest. It should never have belonged to one individual. I filed on the property as wild land and received the first Crown grant from the British Columbia government. There I built a stout, comfortable log home, put in a little power plant off the main falls, and had all the comforts of a city home. For years I maintained floats, shore gangways, outdoor fireplaces, trails, and so on, for the use of any visitor. Loggers, trappers, Indians, fishermen, and yachtsmen were all equally welcome to any hospitality I had to offer. I had a deep feeling that I was only the custodian of the property, and it was my duty and pleasure to extend every courtesy to any visitor. My house burned down in 1940, and my power plant was given to the community hall at Pender Harbor. The purchasing power of a slender income has so diminished that I am now unable to maintain the floats and shore facilities that add to the comfort and pleasure of visitors. Therefore, I am turning over the property in perpetuity to the boating public of British Columbia, Washington State, and Oregon, with the hope that you, your children, and your children's children, ad infinitum, may maintain and enjoy the beauty and peace of the Princess Louisa Inlet. This will be an international project. Through the coming generations, let it become a symbol of international understanding and friendship. This is my prayer." The Princess Louisa International Society accepted this trust and the challenges it presented. In 1964, to broaden the financial and administrative load, the International Society entered into a partnership with the British Columbia Parks Administration, and since then, the Princess has become a British Columbia Marine Park. The Society, the British Columbia Parks Ministry, other stakeholders and property owners have striven to carry on Mac's vision. The Society has raised funds, lobbied governments, purchased more land within the inlet, and has monitored the use of the inlet so that Mac's dream may forever be fulfilled. The Princess Louisa International Society is always happy to receive donations from those who have enjoyed visits to this wondrous place. Princess Louisa Inlet? Who was the princess after whom this princess was named? There has always been some controversy about the origins of its name. The inlet may have been named after Princess Louise, the fourth daughter of Queen Victoria, who was a little girl at the time in 1860 when Commander Mayne first entered and explored the inlet. This Princess Louise later married the Marquis of Lorne, who became the Governor-General of Canada, and she was immensely popular in Western Canada. At one point, the Canadian government in the east upset the West Coast folk so much that some of them wanted Vancouver Island to become an independent state, with Princess Louise as its first queen. The idea came to naught but it did demonstrate how popular she was. The more accepted theory of the origin of the inlet's name is that it was named after Queen Victoria's mother, who was born Princess Mary Louise Victoria in Germany. She was very popular too, and she had died at about the same time that the inlet was first explored by the British Navy. So we shall never know for certain. These days, in the age of easy point-and-shoot digital photography, there must be millions of photographs in existence of the Princess Louisa. In the past, some have painted pictures here or tried to write poetry about it. Visitors who come to the Princess are often stuck for the words to adequately describe it. For most of them, it's beyond words. Some have come, however, and at least made an attempt. Earl Stanley Gardner, the mystery writer who, amongst other things, created the inflexible, infallible lawyer Perry Mason, was an intrepid world traveller. In October and November of 1924, he went sailing in Western Canada aboard the vessel Spray. During this time, the boat sailed into Princess Louisa, and in his subsequent book, The Log of a Landlubber, he wrote of the Princess, "There is no use describing that inlet. Perhaps an atheist could view it and remain an atheist, but I doubt it. There is a calm tranquility which stretches from the smooth surface of the reflecting water straight up into infinity. The deep calm of eternal silence is disturbed only by the muffled roar of throbbing waterfalls as they plunge down from sheer cliffs. There is no scenery in the world that can beat it. Not that I've seen the rest of the world. I don't need to. I've seen Princess Louisa Inlet. Every day showed some new glimpse of nature. Constantly changing clouds clung to the sheer cliffs for companionship, drifting lightly from crag to crag, lazily floating along above the swimming reflections, giving ever new light combinations, ever new contours. Clouds, water, trees, mountains, snow and sky all seem to be perpetually the same through the countless ages of eternal time, and yet to be changing hourly. One views the scenery with bared head and choking feeling of the throat. It is more than beautiful. It is sacred. Perhaps Earl Stanley Gardner was a bit over the top with his purple prose, but we know what he meant. Here we are, leaving the Princess at slack water. The tide has just turned, the water is, for a few minutes, still and calm, and the Princess is allowing us to go out into the rest of the world. The Malibu Club is on our right. One cannot help but think about the changes that have occurred there in those buildings over the last 70 years or so. From the giddy heights of ambition of Mr. Hamilton, with his dreams of luxury resorts, golf courses, dry martinis and Manhattans, John Wayne, Bing Crosby and Bob Hope all belly up to the bar, to the years of abandonment and dereliction. Then came its salvation to become what it is today, a place of growth and happiness and joy to countless numbers of young people. Mac would be pleased and proud to see what it has grown to be after he saw its early development. Jervis Inlet, the way back to so-called civilization. What a week we have had at Princess Louisa. It's not easy to get to. You need a boat or a float plane. The nearest road is over 40 miles away. The magical qualities of the inlet are what struck me the most. The sheer cliffs rising a mile high straight from the water. All around are the thick rainforests. The trees are tall and their trunks are covered with greeny blue moss. The forest glades are deeply shaded, and one half expects gnomes, elves, and fairies to appear around every corner. The tweeting and chattering of the birds are constant. It is truly truly a magical place, restful and tranquil. There are other places in the world which are similar, some parts of the South Island of New Zealand, for example, or the fjords of Norway, but none more beautiful. There are boaters who truly love the Princess and come back here as often as possible year-round. A favourite time is midwinter, when a handful of boats will come to celebrate Christmas or New Year's there. At that time, the inlet is crusted with ice, the trees are heavy with snow, the air is diamond clear, and everything shimmers and sparkles when the sun shines. The falls in winter are a miracle of beauty, the surface solidly frozen and gleaming blue-green, and the water still flowing a little under the crust of ice. Everyone should be fortunate enough to see Princess Louisa Inlet, the Princess, as Mac called it, at least once in their lives. And again, as Mac said, it is a place where a person can find the peace that surpasseth all understanding.